What pushed you to want to run for president?
I saw, I grew up so proud of this country and loving, this country and being proud. And, I grew up at a magical time in American history, which economists call the Great Prosperity. It's a time between 1947 and like 1980 when our country became the wealthiest country in the world. We developed the middle class like nothing that's ever been seen in history. That became this economic machine and a machine for democracy. And we were generating during that period half the wealth on the face of the earth we owned here in this country. Everybody wanted American things. America was, it was a moral authority around the world. It was a leader, and everybody wanted our leadership. They don't like our bullying, but they wanted our leadership, and they knew the difference. But they wanted, I would travel in Europe when I was a kid, and with my father and my mother, and people just adored our country. And people wanted blue jeans. They wanted American cars. They wanted Victrola, RCA Victrolas, and our electronics, and they wanted our movies and our television, and and they wanted our democracy, and I want my kids to grow up with that love for our country and that pride for our country. And I don't see the path from either political party getting us there at this point. I think, both parties have lost their way. And my party, the Democratic Party, has become the party of war. It's become the party of censorship. It's become the party of pharmaceutical companies, of, the neocons, this very aggressive, belligerent foreign policy, that's forever wars. And then, of the kind of political suppression that we saw, and this bizarre turning our backs on the American middle class, which is the only thing that sustains democracy. If you don't have a middle class, you cannot. Any political scholar, political scientist will tell you that if you have large aggregations of wealth at the top and widespread poverty below, that formulation is too unstable to support democracy. And the middle class has just been wiped out in this country, and nobody's talking about it. It's really, and I think that's why, Trump was so popular. Is he, he was the one guy who's talking to those people. And, and he's saying, and they're angry because nobody's listening to him. And Trump said, I'm listening to you, and I'm going to go break things for you. And they are angry, and they want things to get broken. And I think, my father used to look at Latin America, and it was the same thing back then. It was widespread poverty below, and it was, wealth above. And U.S. foreign policy was to sort of fortify those oligarchies and support with weapons, et cetera, the military juntas that were keeping those people in suppression because they were anti-communist. And my father said, there's going to be a revolution in those countries. And if we continue those policies, the communists are going to own the revolution, and they're going to own the future. And we have to give aid directly to the poor and stop giving it to the oligarchs and stop giving it to the military. And that's why my uncle and father started the Alliance for Progress and USAID, to do something that had never done before, which is to develop middle class by funding the development of middle class of the poor. And I would say the same thing is happening in this country today, that where the oligarchs are running things and the military, and there's going to be a revolution, and either it can be owned by Donald Trump, or we can try to, marshal and mobilize that energy for a more idealistic vision of our country. And, when my father ran in '68, he put together a populist coalition of left and right. And, and he was able to do that. He was able to do that by telling the truth to people, including truths that they didn't want to hear. And he was You know, on the last day that he died, the day he died, he won the most urban state in our country, which was California, and the most rural state, which was South Dakota. He had bridged the gap between, and when I was with him when he died in Los Angeles, and then we flew his body back on US-2 on, Humphrey's plane, Vice President Humphrey's plane to New York, and then we waked him in St. Patrick's Cathedral, and the crowds just, it was like a flood of humanity on that street. The whole street was blocked. People standing 10 feet deep for half a mile. And then we brought him from Penn Station in Washington. He was in the caboose and the coffin, and then there was a train that we took to Union Station in Washington, D.C. And the people on that train were the people who would have been probably one of the greatest governments in United States history. And that train ride was supposed to take 2.5 hours. It took 7.5 hours. Because there were 2 million people on the tracks, and they were white people, they were people in military uniforms, they were Boy Scouts standing, saluting. I remember passing a Little League field where all of the people, all the kids on both sides were standing, holding their gloves and saluting, and the coaches and all the people in the stand. There were Catholic priests, there was rabbis. I remember passing in Delaware. I was 14 at that time. A pickup truck that had 6 or 7 nuns in their habits, standing in the bed of the truck, and they were waving rosaries and handkerchiefs at us. In the major urban centers, the train stations, we crept through at a crawl to avoid hitting people, but they were just jammed with people, almost all black people in Trenton and Newark and Baltimore and Wilmington. And they were singing the Battle Hymn of the Republic. We had the windows open on the train. And then there were hippies and tie-dyed T-shirts. You can go look at the people. There's photographs of the people lining that track. You can call them up over there, James, if you find them. But anyway, when we got to Washington, President Johnson met us there and took us in a convoy. We rode past the mall, and when we got to the mall, my uncle, or my father, and Martin Luther King had been talking together, and they were talking about how do we get poor people the right, because the Vietnam War was sucking all the money out of the war and poverty, and